And joining us live now from Goa is editor-at-large Headlines Today, Rahul Kanwal, who spent the better half of today, lucky as it was, on board INS Vikramaditya as Narendra Modi and his entire team got a chance to see some really raw maritime power firsthand. Over to you, Rahul.
Thank you very much, Shiv, and what a day it has been. The Prime Minister's first visit outside the national capital after assuming power, and it happened to be on the INS Vikramaditya. By sitting in the cockpit of the MiG-29K, Narendra Modi sending a message to his armed forces, sending a message to the world that he himself will be in the cockpit driving India's military matters from here on. For the past 10 years, the Army, Navy and Air Force have complained of negligence under Manmohan Singh and Defence Minister A.K. Antony, but Modi promises to change all that. It was raining heavily while we were on board the Vikramaditya. The winds were blowing, the waters were very choppy, but that didn't deter Narendra Modi at all. He stood firm, stood out on the deck, took the guard of honor. There was a steam pass that happened, and he commissioned and welcomed into the Indian Navy the pride of the Western Fleet, INS Vikramaditya. After much delay, many cost overruns, the INS Vikramaditya, the most potent, the most expensive fighting machine in India's history, finally ready to hit the seas.
My biggest priority is national security. 6 words that best describe the message from Prime Minister Modi's presence on the Navy's biggest warship today. Modi is in control, in the driver's seat. That's what the ceremonials were about today on board INS Vikramaditya. If the images were unmistakable, so were the chief executive's words.
भारत सुरक्षित होना ये सबसे पहली शर्त होती है, सबसे बड़ी ताकत होती है, चाहे वो नौसेना हो, थल सेना हो या वायु सेना हो.
Less than 3 weeks into office, the new Prime Minister got a sweeping first-hand view of India's maritime strength. As Modi gazed out at the awesome power on display, he might have known just how big the task at hand really is.
जिसने अपना जीवन मां भारती के लिए आहुत करने का संकल्प किया है, उस नौसेना के जवानों के लिए विक्रमादित्य क्या ताकत है, वो भली भांति वो जानता है, समझता है.
Today's ritual day at sea for Modi has sent out a no-nonsense, unmistakable signal. Nothing will keep Prime Minister Modi up at night more than the defense of the nation. Bureau Report, Headlines Today.
So what is it about the INS Vikramaditya that makes this mean machine so special and so different from anything else the Navy currently has in its fleet? Our defense correspondent Shivarud puts together a whole set of facts, everything you need to know about the INS Vikramaditya and why this vessel is such a special fighting machine.
Well, it's the biggest, strongest and costliest warship ever to enter service with the Indian Navy. It's 45,000 tons, 283 meters long and 22 stories high. That's how big the INS Vikramaditya really is. Its entire flight deck takes up 2 acres of space. That's the amount of space it actually requires to bring aircraft in. 1,600 personnel required to run this huge warship. Anything less than that and it simply won't run. 36 aircraft can be parked all along its deck, and it also has a hangar right below the deck where many of these aircraft can actually be parked in case more aircraft have to come on board. And this is the most brilliant thing. 45 days of endurance. The amount of fuel on board, the amount of supplies on board means this is a ship with its range and endurance. It can actually travel very far from Indian shores. It's got a long-range surveillance radar which is mounted right at the top of the mast here, which gives this ship really sensitive eyes and ears. It's a battle group. It's a big ship, but it's also vulnerable. So it has to travel at all times with a submarine, 2 frigates and a destroyer, all of which are of course armed completely to the teeth, which means this is a huge and powerful warship, but it needs its protection at all.
We are currently on the flight deck area of the INS Vikramaditya. Behind me, the MiG-29K, customized for the Indian Navy so that it can land here on the flight deck of the Vikramaditya. To talk about this, Lieutenant Commander Harsh Mehta, thank you very much, sir, for joining us in Headlines today. I want to understand more about the operations that the Navy conducts in the flight deck area of the INS Vikramaditya.
Welcome on board Vikramaditya. This is the flight deck of Vikramaditya. The place where you're standing right now is comprised of the flight deck. This is the landing area where the aircrafts come and land.
What are these cables for? We see these cables over here. In the demonstration video, we saw the planes trying to catch up. How does that?
This is the arresting wire. This is the arresting wire, which there is a control. We got 3 arresting wires here. One is there after pass, and these arresting wires are utilized for the by the MiG-29 aircraft. When it comes in for landing, it's got a hook, it gets deployed from the end of the aircraft, and it gets hooked on with this wire, which restricts.
So that's how the plane slows down at fast speeds in such a short area.
There is a limited area in which the wire extends, and it's able to deaccelerate the plane within this landing area.
Okay. I also want you to talk our viewers through all these radar systems that we see. Explain the role of some of these important radars and how important are they for the INS Vikramaditya.
The ship has got radars based on the roles the ship is supposed to play. We've got different kind of radars there, and they are utilized for the carrying out of the air operations, and they've got different reasons because you can understand, like when the aircrafts are approaching the ship, there are different circuits, different regions so basically the task of this ship.
To talk about the flight operations on the MiG-29K, we've got Lieutenant Commander Vikram Chauhan with us. You're a MiG-29K pilot. How big a deal is it for the Navy to finally have the MiG-29K landing on the flight deck of Vikramaditya?
It is a very big deal. As everybody is aware that the Vikramaditya is a very potent yet expensive asset that the Indian Navy has procured, and the only reason that we got this carrier is so as to operate fighter aircraft. The length and the breadth of the carrier is meant to operate fighter aircraft. The operationalizing of the MiG-29K is obviously a very big deal, and we are very proud that we have been able to do it safely.
Today is a day when all the effort put in by the entire team of the Vikramaditya finally bears fruit. Joining us, the captain of the ship, the man for whom it's the biggest moment of them all, Captain Shukri. Thank you very much, sir. And heartiest congratulations. Thank you very much. Dream being fulfilled with the induction of the ship finally?
Absolutely. Dream of the Indian Navy, dream of India, and of course Team Vikramaditya. It's a tremendous honor that dream has come true. The ship is here, the aircraft are here on board, and the Honorable Prime Minister is dedicating us to the nation today.
And it's also a big moment for you personally, being picked, handpicked to be the first captain of the pride of the Indian Navy.
It was tremendous honor that the Indian Navy has put on me, and we will fulfill the entire task as the Indian Navy expects.
What a big moment it is for all of them. Why is it?
Well, why is the INS Vikramaditya such a game changer for India? What's really the big deal about such a big warship? Well, for starters, and this is something that cannot be stated enough, it makes India a 2-aircraft carrier nation, double the power as far as its global power projection ability is concerned, which is very important for a navy like the Indian Navy because it needs to operate very far from home and actually send out that message very far from home. It bolsters India's position in the Indian Ocean. Already a powerful nation, but how do you make that message even stronger every time you send your ships out to sea? And finally, and this is again one thing that cannot be underestimated, it pushes naval aviators to the next generation. This is an aircraft carrier that operates fast jets like the MiG-29K, and therefore it makes India's formidable naval aviators jump to the next level of operations.
It was Atal Bihari Vajpayee who first proposed the idea of bringing the INS Vikramaditya into the Indian Navy. It's taken many more years and much more money. The INS Vikramaditya was originally scrapped when India purchased it. We were supposed to get it virtually for free. It was supposed to be a sweet deal offered by the Russians. It turned out in the end to be a very expensive deal, leading many experts and former sailors to question if it was at all worth the effort.
Along with its enormous bulk and the 1,600 personnel it will take to operate her on the high seas, the Vikramaditya comes with the big burden of history. For one thing, Vikramaditya is this ship's third name. She was originally commissioned into the Russian Navy as Baku in 1987, then renamed after naval pioneer Admiral Sergei Georgievich Gorshkov when the Soviet Union collapsed 4 years later. She may look spanking new today, and in many ways she truly is, but her journey into Indian hands began 2 decades ago. In 1994, P.V. Narasimha Rao, who was both Prime Minister and Defence Minister at the time, was offered the Soviet-era Admiral Gorshkov aviation cruiser. The Indian Navy was immediately interested. But in the turbulent few years that followed politically in Delhi, the offer receded to the notorious Indian back burner. The first of many delays that would plague Project 11430, as it was codenamed. When the offer was back on the table, it was just before India went to war. In July 1999, the ship was towed to Sverodvinsk, a Russian Cold War-era shipbuilding town famous as the site for the country's only manufacturer of nuclear submarines, Sevmash. After a decade of negotiations, the elusive contract was signed on the 20th of January 2004 in the presence of then Defense Minister George Fernandez and his visiting Russian counterpart Sergei Ivanov. It was the biggest defense deal thus far between the two old allies. By the end of that year, work had begun in earnest to transform a rusting heap of forgotten metal into the shining aircraft carrier that the Indian Navy had been promised. But as the first Russian engineers entered the insides of the great ship, they reeled in horror. A close inspection of the Gorshkov showed that she would never be repaired and refurbished in the promised 52 months. Russia, a veteran shipbuilder, and India, with its painstaking attention to detail, had managed to stunningly underestimate the scope of work involved. Realizing just how much the scope of work on the massive warship had actually been underestimated by both sides came as a terrible shock to the Indian Navy. The cost of the ship more than doubled to nearly $2.5 billion, more than the cost. It was the shattering delay of 5 years that seriously made things very hot for the Indian Navy. The Indian Navy had no choice but to swallow hard and sail on. Its patience and resilience, fortunately, was rewarded. Slowly, very slowly, the promised transformation took place. Piece by painful piece, the old Admiral Gorshkov shed its skin to gradually reveal a ship that was by all accounts impressive and formidable. With baby steps that spanned over 2 years, the Russian and Indian teams finally mustered the confidence to push the new behemoth out to sea on her own steam.
There may have been many cost and time overruns, but the INS Vikramaditya is finally here. It is part of the Indian Navy. We're slipping into a quick break right now. When we return to the INS Hansa, we'll talk about Narendra Modi's naval challenges, because he needs to go beyond the optics of sitting in a MiG-29K cockpit and actually ring in the changes that the Navy expects of him. Help the Navy modernize and become a mean. While Prime Minister Narendra Modi may have scored on optics by coming on the Vikramaditya today, the challenges are far deeper. China and Pakistan have been rapidly modernizing their submarine fleets, their naval capabilities. India, however, has been languishing. Over the last several years, several key weapon system purchases have been held up because of some acquisition of graft or the other. There have been a series of incidents of negative news that's hit the Indian Navy, one incident after another, casting aspersions, casting doubts about the readiness of our fighting soldiers, of the serviceability of the machines that they use. Modi's challenges are deep, and the question is, Can he also now rise beyond the optics, go beyond the symbolism, and try and undo all the damage that happened over the last several years and fix India's maritime security?
As Prime Minister Narendra Modi stretched out his sea legs on Saturday, it was comfort after months for the Indian Navy. A reassurance that government priorities have not been lost along the way. The brutal truth is India's new chief executive inherits a navy in distress. From a spate of peacetime deaths at sea to a spike in ship accidents to a navy chief who wouldn't have been chief had all things been smooth sailing. Modi's words may soothe after a year of extreme turbulence.
आज सुरक्षा के क्षेत्र में समुद्र से सटे हुए सभी देशों के लिए नौसेना का महात्म्य बहुत बढ़ गया है.
But the maritime challenges ahead are oceanic. Just his top 5 priorities alone provide a sense of how big this mission is. The new government has already announced the establishment of a national maritime authority to sort out and synergize a jumble of departments and agencies involved. Modi will also have to gaze outward. China and Pakistan are rapidly expanding their navies while venturing deeper into the Indian Navy's area of responsibility. Bringing safety back goes without saying. Modi will also need to push the pedal on new submarines and India's delayed indigenous aircraft carrier. Finally, the country's nuclear deterrent needs its naval leg, and soon. The restricted space in this naval fighter cockpit should give Prime Minister Modi a sense of just how little elbow room he really has to bring back on track an erstwhile maritime power that's been allowed to go adrift. With Rahul Kanwal on board the INS Vikramaditya, Bureau Report, Headlines Today.
That's all we have time for on this special broadcast about the induction of the INS Vikramaditya. Modi scoring in the eyes of sailors and soldiers all across the country. The challenge, though, is to remain committed to the cause and to keep ensuring and keep telling the men who sail in their sparkling white uniforms that he will be there for them whenever they need him.